All right, so a few things. One, I don't anticipate going the entirety of this hour and a half for this class. What I did do is I put up a TED Talk and a podcast that I'd like you all to listen to at the end of this class. I sent out an email asking you all to think about this question. And the question was, what are one or two things that went well in the previous week? And then so we've done something like this before, but then also, why did it go well? So why did that happen to you? Does anyone want to share one thing that went well and why it happened? You can raise your hand. You can type it in too if you feel uncomfortable saying it out loud. I can always call on you too. Aiden, can you hear me? I can hear you. Can you guys? Okay. So you asked me for a letter of recommendation. So now you have to give me what went well and then why did it go well for you? One thing.
Um, I got to work.
You got what? I can't hear you, Aiden. It's because he's not here anymore. He didn't want to answer that question that badly. Anyone else? Something that. Yeah, go ahead, Gabriella. Something that. Yep. Mm-hmm. Great. Why? So what about you made you able to stay ahead of the curve on class? Why did that happen? Okay. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it wasn't being bored wasn't what got you there. It was that you're good at planning. So that is a strength that you're working on. Well, I'm glad to hear you're taking advantage of being locked in the house. Aiden, all right, are you back with us? I think you're back with us. I can hear you. All right, give me one good thing that went well. What's up? Go ahead. Good. And why'd you do that? I think we lost your connection again. All right, Aiden, we're not necessarily gonna worry about that. I believe you had a good reason for it. Anyone else? Something that went well, and then why did it go well? Yeah, Joven, what do you got for me? You're here. You're here today. I'm glad you're here today. Anything else? Mm-hmm. Nice. So you're on top of things. Good. Does anyone else want to share anything before we move on? Jamie, go ahead. I saw your hand up. I can hear you. Yeah. What went well and why did it go well for you? Okay. Hmm. That's great. I'm I'm glad you're healthy again and you're feeling motivated again. All right, let's get into it. Like I said, I don't anticipate this taking the whole time. I'm going to start talking about some different coaching styles. You've already been exposed to a few things when we talk about when I even talk about the question that I just asked you right now. That comes out of positive psychology, and it's a good way to start sessions with people. And I had to do that. I think it was last class. But the coaching style that we're going to talk about it comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. And this slide looked a lot better on my PowerPoint before it converted onto this. But the coaching, I just called it the coaching pie. So what do we have? On one side, we have theory, and then theory will inform what behavior change techniques will be used. So, for example, if we were talking about, I'm gonna have it right here, self-determination theory. Self-determination theory tells us that one construct that relates to behavior is competency. And so a behavior change technique that we would apply would ideally target competency. But then there's also how are you delivering that behavior change technique? And the way that you deliver it is probably going to be different than another person's going to be delivering it because you all have your own authentic personalities. So based on theory, we know what behavior change techniques or what constructs we should be targeting, but then how are you actually delivering that? So, how are you coaching somebody? So, when I talk about the delivery, there's a few things. Some things we've already talked about. One is giving people open ended reflections and affirmations too. So, open ended reflections help people continue with that narrative that they're having. So, you're asking good questions to help the change process continue. Affirmations are when you are highlighting a person's strengths. So, when I told Gabriella that she's a good planner, it sounds like she's a good planner. That would be an affirmation. What we used too was positive psychology. So I asked you questions such as what were the things that went well and then why did they go well? So ideally, that would open up the door for what are your actual strengths? And I actually asked that question, what went well and why did it go well, to a lot of people. And a lot of people don't actually reference their own character strengths. So if you notice, what I sent to you guys in that email was what went well. Okay, I got interviewed for those two things. Well, why did that happen to me? That happened to me because one of the things that I do is I work hard to network and put myself out there. A lot of people just say what went well, but they don't necessarily say or attach why it went well. So if you worked out, okay, why did that happen? You worked out because you put time aside and that you value exercise and you value your own health. So that might be why it happened. We'll talk about motivational interviewing in subsequent classes as well. But this class we're going to talk about, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And so what I want to do first is you can raise your hand in this class. So let's do this first one. Raise your hand if your mind has ever dragged you into a scary scenario about the future and has warned you about all the possible things that might go wrong. Raise your hand if your mind's ever done that to you. All right, we have a lot of humans because that's a very human thing. Great. I'm going to lower your hands. All right, next one. Have you ever had a negative self-judgment where you thought to yourself, there's something that you just can't do? I can't do it. You had a negative self-judgment. Great. So you're all human. Good. So I'm gonna share a story with you, and it kind of leads into where I first started to hear about what's called acceptance and commitment therapy. I actually heard about it through some research initially, Evan Foreman and Megan Butrin do a lot of research on weight loss and using this theory. It's funny, I saw Dr. Evan Foreman at a conference in DC last year, and I totally fanboyed out. It's pretty embarrassing. Anyways, I'm going to tell you all a story that I think that you all can probably relate to. So, um, before I moved to Boston to start my PhD, I was a strength and conditioning coach at SUNY Cortland. Since most of you have been in my class before, you probably already know this. So I had basically vertically capped out there. I wasn't going to get paid anymore. There wasn't going to be any more responsibilities opening up. And I wanted to pursue my education. One, because I did want to get my PhD. I wanted to be a doctor, mostly because I wanted to teach and I wanted to have an expansion of career opportunities. But when you think about getting a PhD, it does not guarantee that you're going to get a job when you're done. It's actually pretty hard to get a job. And then it might mean you have to move somewhere maybe where you don't want to move. And it's 4 years. That's a long time. And so this would be what my birthday cake would look like by the time had finished this program. I'm like, that's going to be a long time. That's a really big commitment. Am I sure that I want to do this? Frankly, it's pretty scary. And so I just Googled uncertainty monster. So the uncertainty monster was hanging out with me a lot the year before I decided to come and actually do my PhD. So I actually distinctly remember this. If I had a 3-hour break, I'd be like, I'm going to go, and I actually went down to a weight loss clinic in the city next to me. I'm like, can I talk to somebody about this job? Because that would be a guaranteed job if I was working as a dietitian, which I didn't necessarily want to do. I thought about getting back into physical therapy, and I started observing other physical therapists. Because again, that was a job. If I went to school for that, I'd know I'd get a job with that. And I even thought about being a physician's assistant too, because that I will get a job out of that. But none of those things were necessarily what I wanted to do. So all those jobs were something that would be certain in the end, but I'm not sure if I wanted to do that. Versus in this case, I took the thing where I'm not certain I'd get a good job when I was done, but I knew that I wanted to do it. So just some things that I even had to ask myself was, am I okay with this level of uncertainty? Am I okay feeling like this? Am I okay actually going ahead with this? And then I also had to say, like, are my thoughts actually true? Where it's like, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty. I might not get a job. So I had to consider that. Am I okay feeling uncomfortable? And is that true that I might not get a job when I'm done? So I think so. One, this is the definition of suffering: the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. So whenever I think about anybody that maybe wants to make a change, maybe they're not exercising, and they want to start exercising, but they're struggling with it, or maybe somebody that wants to lose weight, but they're struggling to actually do that. I think anytime somebody wants to change something, they're just going in between a state of one. They're choosing what they want to struggle for. So if somebody wants to lose weight, they're clearly struggling with how they're doing right now. Maybe they're not happy with how they look, but then they try to lose weight, and then they struggle with hunger and bad habits. So either way, Shannon, do you have a question? All right. So either way, you're good. So either way, there's going to be some struggle that people deal with. Imagine somebody that wants to quit smoking, but at the same time doesn't want to quit smoking. They're gonna struggle with their addiction, or they're gonna struggle with quitting. So I think that anytime anyone wants to change, there's going to be some level of struggle involved. And I think as a coach, we're not necessarily helping people solve their problems, but we help them outgrow their problems, and we help them get through that struggle and come out on the more positive side of things. So what I want to cover that was kind of a brief introduction into what acceptance and commitment therapy is. So we're going to cover what acceptance and commitment therapy is, what are the 6 concepts, and it's called ACT, so acceptance and commitment therapy. We're going to talk about what's called cognitive fusion, workability, and then experiential avoidance. So what is acceptance and commitment therapy? The two main things are it's values guided action. And we've talked about values in this class, and it's also mindfulness. So with this, we're helping people figure out what really matters in the big picture. We're using core values to guide, motivate, and inspire behavior change. And we're helping people practice mindful action. So that's action that you take consciously with full awareness, being open to your experience, and fully engaged in whatever you're doing. It also teaches us the psychological skills to handle painful thoughts and feelings effectively in such a way that they have much less impact and influence. And these are known as mindfulness skills. And we also help people clarify what's truly important and meaningful. That is, we're helping people clarify their values. And we use that knowledge to guide, inspire, and motivate people to set goals and take action that helps enrich their lives. So, how are my behaviors congruent with the values that I actually have? So, in terms of mindfulness, mindfulness means paying attention with flexibility, openness, and curiosity. It's an awareness process. It's not a thinking process. So it involves bringing awareness or paying attention to your experience in the moment, as opposed to getting caught up in your thoughts. And mindfulness involves a particular attitude, and that is one of openness and curiosity. It involves flexibility of attention, the ability to consciously direct, broaden, or focus your attention on different aspects of your experience. So what are the 6 concepts in acceptance and commitment therapy? So you have 6 key concepts. The first is contacting the present moment, and that's part of mindfulness. It's being psychologically present. So you're consciously connecting with and engaging in whatever is happening at that moment. So consciously paying attention to our here and now experience instead of drifting off into our thoughts, or also just operating on automatic pilot. So I think a lot of people go through their behaviors acting on autopilot. Someone that's mindlessly eating, they're going on autopilot. They're not thinking about what they're doing. Anyone that has stood at their freezer and ate way more ice cream than they'd like to has gone on autopilot. They haven't been practicing mindfulness. Diffusion. Diffusion is the next concept. So diffusion means learning to step back and separate or detach from thoughts, images, and memories. We step back and watch our thinking instead of getting tangled up in it. And we see our thoughts for what they are, as nothing more or less than words or pictures. So the opposite of that is called cognitive fusion. So cognitive fusion would be when you get caught up in your own thoughts, or you believe the exact content of your own thoughts. And I'll talk about this later, but cognitive fusion would be, imagine somebody that is thinking about exercising, but in their head, whenever they go to the gym, they're just thinking, "Oh, I'm overweight. I don't know what I'm doing." And so what we do is we don't necessarily argue whether or not this is a true or false statement. What you do when you're using techniques from acceptance and commitment therapy is you ask them if that's workable. So if you actually believe the contents of your own thoughts, is that going to help you become the person that you want to be? So if you believe there was truth in that you're overweight and being overweight would stop you from doing exercise, if you actually fuse with those thoughts, if you believe those thoughts to be true, is that going to actually help you become the person you want to be? So the next one is acceptance. And that means opening up and making room for painful feelings, sensations, urges, and emotions. So in this, we drop the struggle with them and let them be. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily like them, but you're not fighting against them. So for example, if somebody wanted to go, let's say someone wanted to go on a diet, and that's often going to involve hunger. It might be wrapped up in things such as maybe somebody was emotionally eating or stress eating. Maybe eating was their way to cope with anxiety. So the question would be, are you okay feeling these feelings as you're going through that change process? The next one is self as context. So there are 2 distinct elements of the mind. One is the thinking self, and the other is the observing self. The thinking self generates thoughts, beliefs, memories, judgments, fantasies, makes plans. Whereas the observing self is the aspect that is aware of whatever we're thinking, feeling, sensing, doing, in the moment. So that is our own awareness. In this, you actually see the difference between your thoughts and what is observing those thoughts. So you might think, oh, I'm if I let's just say that I was worried about going back to school. So I'm worried to go work on my PhD, and I hear all these thoughts that I'm thinking, oh, like it's gonna be 4 years, you're gonna, maybe it's not gonna work out in the end. That's my thinking self that's coming up with that. But then I'm also observing those thoughts as well. So that is more of the observing self, the thing that looks at the thoughts that you have. The next aspect is values, and we've covered values in this class. So values are the desired qualities of ongoing action, and it's how we want to behave on an ongoing basis. So people want to behave in value congruent ways. A lot of you probably exercise because you value your own health and well-being. It's probably the reason why you're in a health-related field. And the next is committed action. So it means taking effective action which is guided by our values. So basically, we're doing what it takes. So, for example, you're all in school right now. You're all sitting in this classroom because ideally you probably have a career goal and you're committing to action that will eventually get you there. And just being in this class is one small part of getting a degree, which will help you get that job later. So all six of those components, the contact of the present moment, values, committed action, self as context, diffusion, and acceptance, are all part of psychological flexibility, which means being in the present moment with full awareness and openness to experience, and then also taking action, which is guided by our values. So if that's psychological flexibility, we have psychological inflexibility. So there's some components that are related to psychological inflexibility, and one of them is cognitive fusion. So in a state of cognitive fusion, we're inseparable from our thoughts. So the opposite would be diffusion, means separating, detaching, or distancing from our thoughts, taking a step back and seeing them for what they are. So I'm wondering, raise your hand if you ever tried to change something and you had a negative thought in your head, and you really believed that thought to be true, and you couldn't seem to get rid of it. You couldn't seem to shake it. Can you raise your hand if that's ever happened to you? Matt, your hand went up first. Will you feel comfortable giving me an example? Yeah. So let's say when I first, let's say, I'll give you an example. When I first got to school here, and I'm picturing everybody that's doing their PhD is much more intelligent than me. Someone's gonna find out that I'm a big dum dum pretty soon too. So I get into school and I'm just like, wow, you're an absolute fraud. You are not. Wow. How did you even get here? You're not that smart. So those are the thoughts that are going on in my head, and I'm just like, you're a fraud. You're a fraud. You're a fraud. So that would be a state of cognitive fusion where I'm like, okay, this is just something that I'm dwelling on way too much. So that would be cognitive fusion. Cognitive, and then diffusion would be, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this. I'm observing what I'm thinking, and I'm going to be like, okay, I'm okay with thinking that, but it doesn't mean that I have to act on it. So the fusion would be where I'm getting completely like wrapped up in those thoughts. Does that help? Yep. Yeah, I think you make a really good point too, and that's actually part of this acceptance and commitment therapy is that struggling is a part of human nature, and that we have issues when we try to not struggle. So, for example, people that have anxiety, the problem becomes worse because they get anxious about being anxious. Anxiety is actually a thing that a normal thing, but people that struggle with it or people that have panic attacks, that's because they get anxious about being anxious and they're thinking about it being anxious and trying not to be anxious. Um, Joven, you have your hand raised for an example, or did you just raise your hand to agree? You don't have to share unless you have something off. All right, go ahead. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah, I think getting caught up in your own self doubt is a very very common thing that that people do. But it sounds like you went through with it, which is good. So you didn't necessarily let it control your behavior, which is an interesting thing. Where sometimes if people have self doubt for something, they just don't do anything. Versus another person has self doubt and they actually do something. So I think that there's it's whether or not your thoughts actually control your behavior. So imagine two people, one person's or actually both people have massive amounts of doubt about going into the gym. They feel like they have no idea what they're doing. It's the first time doing it. One person stays at home and the other person actually goes in there. People improve with experience, so eventually that they outgrow that problem that they had. And again, that's what we all hope to do as a coach or helping people. Um, does anyone have another example of a time that they got so caught up in their thoughts or their thoughts they couldn't escape their thoughts? Yeah, Mike. Yep, I can hear you. Mm-hmm. Great. And I think a lot of you are actually demonstrating diffusion, where you can step back from your thoughts and actually just see them for what they are and not necessarily as something that needs to control what you do. I think that's great. So the state of fusion would be where a thought can be seen as the absolute truth. So Mike, if you thought that was the absolute truth, then you probably wouldn't even try to improve if you thought that was the truth. People in a state of fusion, people see thoughts as a command that you have to obey or a rule that you have to follow or something that you won't let go even if it worsens your life. And then in the state of diffusion, people see a thought as nothing more or less than a bunch of words in their head. They see a thought as something that may or may not be true, that a thought is something that is non-threatening and can be allowed to come and go of its own accord without any need for you to hold on to it or push it away. The next concept is workability. So when we think about workability, we say, is what you're doing working to make your life rich, full, and meaningful? So if yes, it is workable. So unworkable behaviors for people might be chronic smoking, chronic drinking. So those are problematic behaviors that are not workable. So if you say if this is not helping your life become better, it's a non-workable behavior. So when we think about thoughts, we focus on whether or not we don't focus on whether or not a thought is true or false, but whether or not it's workable. So the question is, if you let this thought guide your behavior, will that help you create a richer, fuller, or more meaningful life? So Matt, you talked about self-doubt. And a lot of you guys talked about self-doubt. Um, if you let those thoughts guide your behavior, would that help you create a richer, fuller, and more meaningful life? So if people are paralyzed by self-doubt for any kind of change effort, then would that help them become the person that they actually want to be? So if they let that thought be true and they didn't act, is that going to benefit their lives? And then the next concept is experiential avoidance. And experiential avoidance is trying to avoid, get rid of, or suppress or escape from unwanted private experiences. So private experiences are the same as thoughts. Has anyone ever had, raise your hand if you've ever had a negative emotion and all you wanted to do was get rid of it? Now let me when you had that negative emotion, did you pay a lot? Raise your hand if when you had that negative emotion and you wanted to get rid of it, if you paid a lot of attention to it, if it was the only thing that you could think about. For example, if it was the only thing that you were thinking about and you struggled to pay attention to other things. Has anyone ever experienced that? All right, let's try a little drill. Does that if you have any paper in front of you, just grab that. Grab a piece of paper. And then what I want you to do is give a name to that negative emotion that you felt and write it down on that piece of paper. So I'll give you a minute to think about it. So that'll give you some extra time if you actually need to get a piece of paper. Give you a minute to do that. So whatever negative emotion you had, just take a minute, write it down on a piece of paper. And then raise your hand once you've written it down. Give you a little bit more time. All right, so now do this. Take that piece of paper, and with that negative emotion written on there, what I want you to do is I want you to raise it up and put it right in front of your face. And I want you to just focus on it. So if I was giving this lecture, if I had to start from the beginning, and you had that right in front of your face the whole entire time, would you be able to pay attention to me? Or would you be able to pay attention to your classmates when you're doing a coaching session? The answer is probably not. You wouldn't be able to pay attention to it. But now do this. Why don't you take that piece of paper with that negative emotion and just lower it down, and you can put it right on your lap. And so the whole point of this is that it's still there, okay? But we're not trying to get rid of it. I didn't ask you to rip it up and throw it away because that doesn't actually work. You can't do that. But instead, you're letting it be there. One interesting thing about humans is that we are really, really good at solving problems in the physical world. We have a lot of solutions to the physical world. Um, if it's raining, we can pull out an umbrella. If we need to, I don't know, I'm going to use, if you're a caveman and you're being attacked by a tiger, you can throw a rock at it and it runs away. We can't exactly apply that same exact strategy to the experiences that we have in our head. You can't fight them away. So with experiential avoidances, you're actually just getting way too caught up in trying to get rid of those negative emotions. So examples like that would be, experiential avoidance would be, I'm uncomfortable feeling stressed, so I use eating ice cream as a coping mechanism or something like that. Does anyone raise your hand if you listen to The Daily on the New York Times? It's a great podcast. Anyone do this? Jasmine does. Jasmine, did you? Aaron does. Did you listen to the OCD episode? This was maybe two months ago, maybe 3 months ago. Well, all right, I think it was Ella, 'cause it says it right there. Ella had OCD. She was terrified of two things. Two things she was terrified of were, I believe it was natural disasters and getting sick and throwing up. And those thoughts basically just owned her mind. So all the time she was just worried about throwing up, and she was worried about hurricanes too. So, or I think it was tornadoes or something like that. And so what she did is, well, what her parents did is she had to go to a camp, and they basically helped her, instead of avoiding those negative thoughts, to actually just work on accepting that. So whenever a voice in her head said, I'm going to throw up, I'm going to throw up, I'm going to throw up, she would agree with that voice. She would just say, I'm going to throw up, I'm going to throw up, I'm going to throw up. So she would accept it, and then it would go away. The issue with what she had was trying to avoid those negative thoughts and feelings actually led to making it worse. And if you've never listened to this, I should have put that up there, this episode on the Daily. I'll put that up on Blackboard too. It's a really interesting one on OCD. So they use these techniques for people that have OCD. And I've talked about cognitive fusion, experiential avoidance. Those are parts of psychological inflexibility. Other parts of psychological inflexibility are lack of clarity in your values, basically fear of the past and the future, attached to a conceptualized self, and then not having committed action. So inaction, impulsivity, or avoidance and persistence. And then again, in contrast, we just have the psychological flexibility where people actually have values. They've identified and clarified their values. They've committed to action that is based on that. They're not caught up in their thoughts and feelings. They're practicing mindfulness. They're aware of what's going on, and they've also accepted some level of discomfort in order to live up to what values they actually have. So that is, in a nutshell, acceptance and commitment therapy. There's some really good books on it. What do I have? Which one do I have? I think it's just called ACT Made Simple. If you're looking for a read, what I will have you do now